Prolific playwright A.R. Pete Gurney has produced almost a play a year over the past 2 decades. His comedies, including The Dining Room and Love Letters, often satirize the affluent environment he grew up in. His off-Broadway successes continue to refute critics who question the vitality of American theater. Currently on stage, Gurney's Sylvia, the story of a man, his wife, and the dog who comes between them. I'm pleased to have Pete Gurney here this evening for a conversation about his work and the theater. Welcome back.
Thank you, Charlie.
Tell me about where in the world the idea for Sylvia came from.
Well...
Or tell me the premise of Sylvia first.
Well, the premise of Sylvia is I think you described it. A man finds a dog in the park. He's been working, he's a trader, he's been working downtown. He comes up, he gets sick of his work, comes up to the Central Park, he falls asleep, and wakes up and there's a dog in his lap, a stray dog. He brings her home. And his wife, of course, objects violently to the idea because they've just moved to New York, and she wants a kind of different life. So where did I get the idea? That actually happened to me, not finding a dog in the park, but getting a dog, probably from my wife's perspective, at just the wrong time.
Yeah. Why just the wrong time?
Well, because, I mean, a dog is a lot of work in New York.
You bet.
And I don't know if you have one.
No, well, I had one, yeah.
So you know, I mean, you have to get up at the crack of dawn. You have to walk them 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
I, myself, don't think I could live without a dog. I went for about 5 years. I brought a dog down to New York when we moved down here in '81, but that dog had a nervous breakdown for being here and died. So I went for about 4 years without a dog, but I just couldn't stand living without it.
Why?
Well, I don't. It's a complicated thing. There's some kind of connection. I think any dog lover will tell you the same thing. There's some kind of thing that happens between you and I mean, sure you know that there's a kind of. I'd say in the play maybe it's even a genetic affinity. And there's a man in England, I was talking to the director who's going to be directing it in London, and there's a man in England whose name I've forgotten, who's doing a lot of research about this kind of instinctive attraction that human beings have for animals, and whether it is indeed genetic. Whatever it is, it gives me a great deal of pleasure, and I don't mind that much getting up at 6 in the morning in a rainy, cold day and walking my dog Lucy.
So Lucy, in a sense, caused this play to be written.
Yes, but the play, the dog in the play is not necessarily Lucy. I mean, it's partly Lucy. But what's interesting about it, from my perspective at least, is the fact it's been played by 2 very different women. Sarah Jessica Parker started, and she played it as a kind of a feisty, cuddly, young dog.
Sarah Jessica Parker-like dog.
Yeah, right, exactly. Exactly. And Jan Hooks is doing it now, and Jan Hooks made an absolute point. She didn't even want to see Sarah Jessica do it. She didn't want to pick up one thing. She wanted to, she's a great dog lover. Yeah. And she came in and did an entirely different interpretation, which to me is equally funny.
Now, this is an interesting thing, because neither of them necessarily are interpreting the playwrights, except they're using the playwright's words.
Well, this always happens. I mean, what's interesting about the theater is how you give them the words, but the actors, it's like a piece of music. The actors play it their particular way.
Well, do you or the director have to rein them back in sometimes?
Sometimes.
That you're a little way off.
Sometimes we have to say that's a little too much, or sometimes the director more than I, can say you could take that a little farther. What we all agreed from the beginning, and the actors who played it both agreed, we don't want to get cute and arfy. I mean, dogs take themselves very seriously. In fact, you could argue a dog has no sense of humor. But they
have a sobering view of life,
right,
do they?
Right. But they don't come on in a furry costume and look.
I know Sarah Jessica and Janet, they both play it dressed in.
Yeah, they dressed in kind
of
scruffy clothes.
Right.
But when they go to the beauty parlor, Sarah Jessica came back in a little pink dress with a bow in her hair. Jan Hooks comes back in a kind of slinky pantsuit.
All right, now set this scene up, because I want to just give you a sense of what this play is about. This is Sylvia Meets Phyllis. Now, I don't know whether this is Sarah or Jan, Sarah Jane Parker. Sarah Jessica Parker.
I suspect it's Jan. I suspect it's Jan.
Set the scene up where Sylvia meets Phyllis.
Well, they moved to New York, this family, and the wife, as happens in New York, the wife has met an old friend from Vassar on the street and said, come on up, and we'll just talk about the old days. The husband is out walking the dog. They sit down, they start to talk. Their dog hair's all over, which bother everybody. Finally, they're just getting into a conversation when the husband brings home the dog, and the dog confronts the guest, who is a kind of ticket to New York. For the wife, the guest is a kind of way that she wants to work in the schools, and the guest can introduce her to a lot of people that are working in the public schools and are concerned about it. So that the dog, when the dog attacks the guest, it kind of messes up the wife's career.
All right, take a look. This is it. Sylvia.
Hello?
There they are. Phyllis Cutler's here, dear. Now brace yourself.
Phyllis, God, how good to see you again. This is Sylvia.
Hello, hello. Oh. Nice crotch there. Nice crotch. You see what I mean?
Yes, I am beginning to see what you mean.
She doesn't normally do that.
She does all the time.
Hey, listen, we learned 3 new tricks today. Want to see them?
We do not.
Well, Phyllis wants to see them, don't you, Phyllis?
Well, I do.
What was great is to listen to you watch that with the same sense as if it was the first time you'd seen it.
I must say, I get a kick out of seeing my plays anyway. I always go in there and I start laughing. I know I shouldn't. It's like someone laughing at his own jokes.
Well, but it's genuine, and you get it, and in a sense it causes you to laugh over and over. Even though you know it's coming, you still laugh.
Well, I should say, too, in this case, the man who plays the visiting guest has to play 3 roles in the play, because it's all about how we project onto a dog or whoever our own kind of fantasies. And just as the husband sees the dog as a rather attractive woman, so we ask the audience to project onto this 4th character. Well, sometimes he's a man, sometimes, in this case, he's a woman, and at the end of the play, he's a psychiatrist who can be either one you want him to be.
Now, do you have to be an animal lover to enjoy this play?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. Now, how do I know? I'm an animal lover, and I enjoy it, but people tell me, some people who hate the stage manager example, a wonderful man named Roy Harris, hates dogs, and yet he seems to have stayed with the play for 6 months.
Overtime. Where is Overtime?
Overtime we're doing at the Manhattan Theater Club, in their little theater. And we go into rehearsal in January, and we're just in the process of casting that.
It's a multicultural what?
It's a play about ethnic identity in America. And it's my take on the Merchant of Venice. If you can imagine the story of the Merchant of Venice continuing after Shakespeare drops it, but we put it in contemporary language, of course. It's
one of departure for you from what you've done in the past?
In some ways, yes. And in some ways, no. I mean, I have sort of played with, or let's make it sound more serious, I've worked with old myths and stories. I've done the Medea, I've done Antigone, I've done various plays like that and given a kind of modern take on it. This is the most elaborate thing I've done, and it's certainly got the largest cast I've ever worked with in a long time, with one exception. So I'm very excited.
With a variety of ethnic backgrounds.
Yes, yes.
When you put something together for you, what are you thinking about? I mean, you just if you talk to a director, a playwright, I mean, they're thinking about telling a story, and moving the action along. What are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, the theater is a very collaborative thing, and this is why I've stayed with it. It's the least lonely of the arts, I think. So when I write a play, but the draft that I hand to the director is really a primitive draft normally. And there are about 3 or 4 or 5 directors I've worked with in my life. They all have suggestions. We try it in a reading. I change it after the reading. And then in rehearsal we change it. So it's not just what I'm thinking about. I love the conversations with the designers when we're fussing about how it should look. I love the conversations with the costume.
Do sets really make a difference?
They make a great deal of difference. A set can illuminate a play or kill it. Now, as you well know, in New York now, the emphasis on Broadway seems to be on the set, maybe too much on the set. What I like about off-Broadway is that the set is supportive. It's not dominant. We don't normally go for tremendous stage effects if you have an off-Broadway
I just
play.
saw Racing Demon. I mean, the set...
Yes, well, that's a spectacular set, and that uses projections,
Exactly.
which is a new...
Projection set scene, but then all you have in the middle there is nothing but a table or something.
They bring tables out and off. I mean, it's amazingly fluid, and the projections, of course, let you know where you're going. And projections, I think, is a new way of going in the theater. I'm not totally comfortable with them myself. I think there's some kind of clash between the literal quality of the projections and the three-dimensional nature of the actor. So I'm not totally at home with it.
Can you work on more than one play at a time?
Not simultaneously.
You can't carry on one story.
I always try to keep one, warming up somewhere. I mean, I got nailed a lot when I first started writing plays, and I used to slink back to MIT and to teach, and that was all I had. I had my family, of course, and I adored my students, but I always like to keep a little insurance policy. If I get killed, I always say, well, I've got this one on the runway. Maybe that'll fly.
Can you explain to us what it's like to be a playwright and the terror that must be there?
Well, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
It's a very, as I say, collaborative joy. I don't like to ever have in my plays. I don't like to say A.R. Gurney's Sylvia. I don't like that. I think it should be Sylvia in smaller letters by A.R. Gurney and whoever else is in it, who directed it, who's in it. I think we're all in the thing together. But the pleasure in the end and the final rush of success, if you get it, there's nothing better. And failure is ghastly because it's very public. When you get a bad review, and particularly in the New York Times, because most of your friends read that, and that silence the next day when the telephone doesn't ring because nobody knows how to console you, and there's no way around it except you know that maybe 2 or 3 days later somebody else will fail just as bad.
Well, that's a very small comfort, isn't it?
Well, it helps.
Except to know, I mean, it's like there's someone else that can commiserate with my suffering because they're suffering as well.
Well, what you have a sense of that at least the spotlight isn't on you anymore, Charlie.
Frank Rich left the Times 4 or 5 years ago now, I guess, or 3. How long has it been?
About 3, I think.
Is it different now in terms of the impact of the New York Times?
I think the impact of the Times itself is just as strong, but I think maybe Vincent Canby has a more generous-spirited and maybe ecumenical perspective. I do think there's a lot of juice going on in the theater today, and I think to the degree that the Times is responsible for the excitement, I think we have to salute Canby on it.
Yeah, but then is the other side, you believe, that Frank, because he was so tough, stifled that?
I don't think you can stifle a theater. I think he was a little scarier, and I think a few plays that he nailed that should have lasted and didn't suffered because of him. I think it's more a question of atmosphere. It's a more question of general atmosphere and more confidence now when you go into production and when you wait for the reviews. You know you're not going to be quite so pilloried as you were.
So you got Sylvia is going. Sylvia opens in London.
Yeah.
Overtime opens in January, February?
Yeah, it'll open in February. It'll go into previews in February.
Yeah. And are you already thinking about the next one?
Well, I have a sort of yes, I'm already thinking. I am in March doing a workshop of a musical in New Haven with John Tillinger, who directed Sylvia. It's a Cole Porter musical. There's some wonderful old Cole Porter songs which people don't know. And I tried to devise a plot set in the 30s which would kind of display Cole Porter.
And a workshop is a place where you can kind of experiment, see whether we have something here to work. You know, can we make this fly?
And it'll be just a piano, very little emphasis on. So we're just going to discover, do the songs still hold? Does the story hold? Are the jokes there?
A.R. Pete Gurney, Sylvia, and later Overtime. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
We thank you for joining us this evening. Look forward to seeing you next time. See you then.